Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief. Today we're going to be talking about how Russia is reaching for straws in the war against Ukraine, now that the United States has shifted its course a little. And of course, we're going to be discussing it together in the comments, so you don't have to suffer alone, and I don't have to suffer alone. So please leave your questions, suggestions, and any and all constructive criticism that you might have down below, because I love reading it, and I greatly appreciate you guys. Let's go. I want to start today's news brief with acknowledging the MH17 plane downing and the catastrophe that followed that. I would like to take a moment of silence to acknowledge all those who have fallen in the downing of that airplane. This is one of many horrific crimes against humanity that Russia has committed in its history, not just in the war with Ukraine, but also in general. And my heart goes out to all of the families of the people that were on that flight, and I'm really, really sorry for your loss. With that said, Russia and its war machine are grasping for straws. Putin plans to continue the war until the West accepts his terms. He has been saying that, he's going to continue pursuing his objectives in Ukraine until he gets what he wants. It's very funny because he's not necessarily talking about a peaceful settlement. He's literally talking about reaching what he wants. Putin believes that no one has seriously discussed the details of a peaceful settlement in Ukraine with him, including the Americans, so he will continue until he achieves what he wants. I mean, you can't necessarily seriously discuss anything with Putin when he's not listening to any reasoning. He's just continuously pursuing his crazy goals of denazification, demilitarization, and basically wiping Ukraine off of the face of the earth. When it's quite funny to hear Putin specifically talk about the fact that no one's taking negotiations seriously when this is the man who doesn't want to negotiate, he wants to dictate. And every single time that he talks about negotiations, he sends barrages of missiles and drones onto Ukraine. It is kind of funny to hear him say negotiations when he is the person who actually invaded a country and whose soldiers are coming here and are reporting that they don't feel welcome and that people lock their doors in their faces and that they don't want to see them and they see them as occupiers. Yeah, for sure, there is room for negotiation. The only negotiation that you can receive is take your troops and get out of our country. In the meanwhile, the US has changed its course on Ukraine. There are plenty and multiples of weapons that are being delivered. And surprisingly enough, it wasn't just Trump talking, it was actually Trump talking and then doing something, which is a first. However, thank you for that. And we're going to be receiving a lot more new weapon systems, and Germany is going to be helping. EU countries are going to be paying for a lot of American weapons for Ukraine. Now, neither the US nor Europe are disclosing which countries those are going to be, and that's good. And it's good that they're not disclosing which weapons, because I personally think that the less Russia knows, the better. Meanwhile, Keith Kellogg, the special envoy to the war between Ukraine and Russia, has been in Kyiv for 2 days now, and Zelensky is already making jokes about that because he recently did an interview on Newsmax talking about a lot of different issues about his phone call with Trump, and one of the things that he has mentioned is that Putin is scared of the United States, which is why for the past 2 days that Keith Kellogg has been in Ukraine, there have been no airstrikes onto the capital city. Personally, I don't think that that's interconnected. I just think Russia has other objectives. They have been shelling Kharkiv and other cities. They have just struck the center of Dobropilla, which is a small city in the east, and there are lots of injured, and there are already deaths, and it was a horrendous event. So I don't necessarily think that Russia is not barraging Ukraine because of Keith Kellogg. I do think that Russia is, in fact, scared of the United States, and they know that the United States has all the weapons to defeat them. They just weren't necessarily worried by it at all because, well, they had Trump who kept listening to Putin, buttering him up and agreeing with Putin, So it's been a while since Russia was actually scared of doing something or making a wrong move with American retaliation in mind. So that's a nice new refresh. Meanwhile, Zelensky joked, saying people are already joking, give Kellogg a Ukrainian passport and let him live in Ukraine, he added. As in, because there haven't been any airstrikes on Kyiv while Kellogg has been here, The joke is, let him move here. Maybe there won't be any airstrikes. However, and I don't want to be a party pooper, but I will be anyway, once he's Ukrainian and not American, it's not like Putin's going to care, right? So that logic is a bit faulty. Anyways, another thing that came out of the Newsmax interview is that during the phone call between Zelensky and Trump, Zelensky asked Trump to buy American weapons, and Trump allegedly expressed interest in buying Ukrainian drones, which is also a very interesting development because we've talked about Ukraine innovating, we've talked about Ukraine creating sea babies, the drones that operate in the water, we've talked about Ukraine revolutionizing the weapons industry, and I have mentioned this before that there are going to be a lot of countries interested in purchasing Ukraine's tech when it comes to weapons, so that's a very good development. Now, back to Russia and their shenanigans, now that Trump finally chose the approach of pressure on Russia, not buttering Russia up and not agreeing with Putin. Russian Finance Committee urged urgent tax hikes to save the budget, reported the Moscow Times. So there is chaos in Russia. Obviously, the money situation is really bad, and no matter how much they inflate the economy, it's never going to be stable. It's never going to stay at a level at which it should, because, well, Russia is currently operating in the state of being a war machine and spending all of the money from its budget and all of the money from any avenues and revenues that they can think of onto continuing this war. In light of more pessimistic economic forecasts and declining oil and gas revenues, we must urgently begin consolidating the budget, said committee head Anatoly Artamonov. He suggested using all available means to boost state revenue, including abolishing certain tax benefits, which now account for nearly a third of the federal budget, and cracking down on under-the-table envelope salaries. What he means by that is paying people in cash. But interestingly, I do think that what they're going to be cracking down on is social services and social programs, which in Russia already function very poorly. And maybe 1/3 of the budget is dedicated to those services, but that, they don't see the light of that money ever, and that money only sees the light of day in some politician's pocket, because Russia is one of the worst places for social services that exists on this planet, out of the developed countries. And interestingly, but not shockingly or surprisingly, the Kremlin has called on the United States to pressure Ukraine into continuing negotiations with Russia. You know why? Because again, this whole scenario was working for Russia very well. They were sweet-talking Trump. Trump was like, okay, yes, Putin wants peace. Then Trump would hang up the phone. Putin would go bomb the cities. They would pretend like they're having negotiations with Ukraine. And they were basically pressuring the United States into pressuring Ukraine into surrendering. And that was working greatly for them. Dialogue is not a form of communication with Russia that will scare Russia, that will show Russia authority. Force is what Russia sees as authority. So anyways, I digress. Basically, this form of faux negotiations and the United States talking Ukraine into accepting Russia's conditions was obviously working for Russia, and it was a great deal for them because they got to bomb Ukraine and sit there pretending like they're playing diplomacy, right? Now, it's not working for them. Now that Trump has changed course, the US has changed course, Europe is trying to consolidate all of their help and tune it up a notch, a big notch. They're not happy, and they're not happy because obviously this doesn't work for them. Obviously, they understand that with Europe and the US aligned in their interests, Ukraine will be able to do a lot more phenomenal things that Ukraine has done before with US and European help when they were aligned and when they were looking in the same direction and when things were coming here in time. Russia doesn't want that. It's not convenient for Russia. When Russia says force Ukraine to negotiate, what they actually mean is continue forcing Ukraine to surrender. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Moscow urges everyone to push Kyiv towards talks. He once accused Ukraine of wanting war and claimed that all expressions of support for Ukraine are viewed by Kyiv not as signals for peace, but as encouragement to continue the war. I hate these statements coming from Russia so much because as an encouragement to continue the war, as in like, you mean as an encouragement to continue defending ourselves instead of falling to our knees? Because from where we're standing and from where the rest of the world is standing, there are missiles flying into our apartment buildings filled with civilians from Russia. Russia is consistently hitting schools, public infrastructure, critical infrastructure, hospitals, universities, literally residential apartment blocks. Russia is an attacker. Russia is the aggressor. Russia is committing war crimes. Russia has invaded Ukraine, and Russia is responsible for all of the horrendous chaos that they deliver onto this country. So Ukraine doesn't really choose whether to continue the war or whether not to continue the war. That choice is only in Russia's hands. Because if Russia stops fighting, there is no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there is no Ukraine. But all of this combined is a very good sign, because we see that Russia is not happy, Russia is threatened, and Russia's little plans of continuing to pressure the world into pressuring Ukraine to surrender are not necessarily working, because maybe Trump finally woke up and realized that Putin is just lying to him and has no respect for him. And doesn't matter how many times he sweet talks him, that doesn't mean anything. So hopefully the next steps are going to be supporting Ukraine, giving Ukraine everything Ukraine needs, and not trying to talk to Russia or listen to what they say, because their words are useless, pointless, and hold no value. That's all I have for you for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this news brief, and if you did, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, give this video a like, send it to a friend so it, travels easier in the economy of YouTube algorithms. And of course, leave your comments, questions, suggestions, anything in your mind down below, because I appreciate you and I love reading it. Till next time.